The Lord is my light and salvation. Whom shall I fear? Whom shall I be afraid?
Dietrich Bonhoeffer has written, forgiveness is a form of suffering. Do you know what that means? If someone has really, really wronged you, you've got to forgive them. You've got to forgive them. If you don't forgive them, you'll be eaten up with bitterness, and you'll become part of the endless cycle of retaliation that makes the world the mess of a place that it is. So you've got to forgive. But Bonhoeffer's right. Forgiveness is agonizing. When you want to pay somebody back, but you don't pay them back, you'll pay. When you want to make them suffer, but you don't make them suffer because you're trying to forgive them, you suffer. Real forgiveness always entails suffering. There's no such thing as forgiveness without suffering, not if you've really been wrong. And if that's true for us, with our minuscule sense and flawed sense of justice, how much more would it be true of God? And the Ethiopian eunuch realized this is God suffering in order to forgive us. If God was not going to pay us back, he had to pay, just like with us. And when the eunuch realized God underwent a violent, voluntary, vicarious death to forgive him and receive him, it changed his life. And here's why it changed his life. I want you to think about this. We've said the gospel is not moral conformity or self-discovery. It's not moralism or relativism. Because you see, moralistic people have a God who's sort of holy and demanding, and the way you have a relationship with this God is you try very, very hard. But when people who have a God who's basically holy and demanding and they're pleasing through moral behavior, when they think of their relationship with God, it doesn't move them to tears. It doesn't galvanize them, electrify them. It doesn't change them from the inside out. They just say, yeah, of course I know God. I work very hard, you know. And then there's people, New Yorkers basically, who think, if there is a God, I believe he loves everyone. He excludes no one. He accepts everyone. Yeah, I have a relationship with God. I'm spiritual because God loves everyone. But if that's what you believe in, a God who just accepts and loves everyone, no matter what, if that's what you believe, when you think of your relationship with God, it doesn't galvanize you. It doesn't move you to tears. It doesn't electrify. It doesn't change you from the inside out. You say, well, of course, he loves everybody. But the biblical God, the God of the gospel, the God of Isaiah, the God of the African eunuch, is infinitely holy and infinitely loving. And that's the reason why God's grace is costly. It's so costly, that's why it's so moving. In other words, God's grace is infinitely costly and melts your heart when you realize that God was so holy he couldn't shrug evil off, but he was so loving he couldn't just punish us for it. And not until you're humbled down into the dust, because he's so holy he had to die for you, and not until you're affirmed and valued into the sky, because he loves you so much that he was glad to die for you, will you be humbled out of the pride that makes you look down on other people, and will you be affirmed out of the self-hatred that makes you look down on yourself at the same time. In other words, only when you see what it cost God to remove your sin will you finally have the death of all inferiority and the death of all superiority, and you'll be able to have freedom, the restructured identity that no one else has. It's impossible to have it any other way. Sure, if you're a moralist, then you feel good, when you're living up, but you're proud, or you feel bad when you're not living up, but you hate yourself. But here, this is proud is gone, and self-hatred is gone, because the gospel says you're so humbled because you're a sinner, and you're so bold because you're absolutely loved at the same time. It gives you a radically new identity. It's the removal of sin and the costliness of it. When the substitutionary death of Jesus Christ is intellectually coherent and existentially melting to your heart, that's when the changes happen. And that comes only when you see God is not just holy and demanding, or not just loving and accepting everybody, but infinitely holy and infinitely loving at once, and therefore his grace is costly. And when that melts your heart, that changes you.